Hello, and welcome back to my haunted house. I hope you're ready for some more scary stories. We'll be continuing on with the scariest stories you've ever heard. This story is titled The Headless Brakeman. As a brakeman on the railroad, Joe Kramer never worked long on any one line. Whenever he got bored with the route he was working, he would ask for a different run. Then he'd hitch a ride on a caboose to the starting point of the new job. So it wasn't unusual that Kramer was bumming a ride one cold, rainy spring night. As the caboose lurched along, he waited for the on-duty brakeman, an old friend of his, to come back from inspecting the cars. What a miserable night, he thought as he peered out of the window at the pelting rain. He pictured his friend climbing over the tops of the swaying cars, and he was glad to be safe inside the caboose. Kramer was slowly nodding off to sleep when suddenly the train jolted violently, throwing him to the floor of the caboose. A washout, he thought. The engines hit a washout, and I'll bet the whole train is derailed. Grabbing a lantern and climbing out of the tilted caboose, Kramer heard the screams and cries of the passengers, but his only thought was of his friend. He searched frantically among the tracks. What he found exceeded his worst fears. Lying between two cars were the grisly remains of his friend's body. And the body had no head. Kramer and the crew picked up the body and placed it in the baggage car, covering it with a blanket. They returned to the tracks and searched until dawn, but they did not succeed in finding the man's head. It was a long time before Kramer felt at peace again, but despite the horrible experience, he wasn't tempted to quit the railroad. Trains had always been his first love. Eventually, he became a fireman, and later he was promoted to engineer. Happy in his new job, he nonetheless tried to avoid taking assignments on the run where his friend had met his terrible fate. But engineers are not as free as brakesmen to take only the jobs they like. Despite his best efforts, the time came when Kramer was forced to make that run. Reluctantly, he prepared the engine and picked his crew. They would leave that night at 8. It was a chilly, rainy evening, much like the night nearly 20 years before that Kramer remembered so well. All went smoothly for a couple of hours, but as the train approached the curve where the fatal washout had been, the engineer glimpsed a faint red light in the distance. Kramer hit the brakes, and the freight train screeched to a halt. He told the fireman to go out for a look. Kramer was puzzled when the fireman returned, saying no light was to be seen. I'll go and have a look for myself, he decided. Sure enough, as he jumped down to the track, he distinctly saw a red light swaying in the distance. Skipping from tie to tie, his own white lantern swinging by his side, Kramer moved forward toward the red light. Soon he could tell it was an old-style, red-globed lantern. It was faintly lit up, the lower part of a man's body, dressed in the regulation blue overalls of a brakeman. "What's wrong?" yelled Kramer as he approached the brakeman. Getting no answer, he shouted again, but the dimly lit figure only moved away from him, further down the track. Kramer followed, moving his feet uncertainly across the uneven tracks. He tried to keep his eyes focused on the shadowy form in the rain, but it kept slipping out of sight. Then suddenly it would reappear just ahead. An eerie feeling came over Kramer as he followed the figure around the very curve where his friend had died. Rounding the sharp bend, he froze in horror. Covering the tracks was a pile of earth and rocks, the worst washout he had ever seen. And standing atop, It was the figure with the red lantern. But now the light was held high by an outstretched arm, and Kramer sensed the truth in the instant before he looked. With a sickened feeling, he saw that the figure had no head. In another instant, the ghostly brakeman was gone. Joe Kramer was an engineer for more than 15 years after that, but he never accepted another assignment on that run. Younger engineers scoffed when they were told that Kramer believed he had been saved from disaster by a ghost. But when Kramer died one cool, wet night in the spring, some say you could see two shadowy figures with red lanterns walking up and down the tracks on that fateful curve. And one of the figures, they say, was headless. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that was kind of sweet. Got to stay with his friend in the end. I hope you like that story as much as you like the other. And I hope you like the stories to come, because I'll be seeing you soon.